the world economic crisis and what it means for the Caribbean. Up next on Carib Nation. Hi, I'm Doris Dean. Welcome to Carib Nation. Today our talk is about the world economic crisis and what that means for the Caribbean, and we'll also talk a little bit about the G20 summit. Ambassador Bernal, thank you so much for joining us, and it's a pleasure to have you back in Carib Nation, even though in a different capacity this time.
Happy to be here.
But you are now in the midst of the world economic crisis. You've been following what has been happening in the Caribbean, working with the regional negotiating machinery. And this is all a bunch of confusion for a lot of people. Let's start out by talking about the world economic crisis. We have the Dow Jones is down while Asia is up, Europe is down, and it seems to be a total roller coaster. What exactly is happening? What caused it? And what do you see as the solutions?
First of all, this economic recession is the most widespread of its kind since the Great Depression. Widespread in the sense that all countries are involved. Previous to this, you would have one or two regions, such as when you had the Asian financial crisis or the Latin American debt crisis, or maybe there's a slowdown in Japan or the US. This is pandemic in that all countries are involved. And it's the deepest recession since the Great Depression. It means that not only the layman is confused, but the policymakers, because we are in an unprecedented situation. The global economy has changed radically over the years, and the global financial markets now involve such massive amounts of money, moving 24 hours a day. No one country has the capacity to stabilize these markets anymore. In the 50s, 60s, 70s, the US could do it by themselves, and if the US economy grew, it was the engine that pulled all the other coaches. Then, later on, it became the G8, and they would get together and stimulate the global economy. Today, the growth process in the world economy relies not only on the G8, but relies on China, Brazil, India, Russia, and other emerging markets. So we're in a new situation, and that is why there is so much confusion in policy. The causes of the crisis are numerous, and they converged together to create the current situation. First of all, on the real side of the economy, the non-financial side, commodity prices moved dramatically, including and particularly the price of oil. Dramatically, up to $140-something a barrel. Happily, it is coming back down now. That was indicative of both changes and pressures in the global economy, such as the surge in demand for these products in China and other emerging markets. But it was also partly to do with speculation, including the food prices had to do with speculation. And these two things converged to drive up prices. Against that scenario, we had on the financial side of the economy a long-term buildup of problems. These problems relate to inadequate risk management, poor supervisory and regulatory regimes, particularly in the developed countries. And therefore, a number of new financial products and services came into being, overborrowing, extended leveraging, and risky investments. All of these converged to create a global economic crisis, which has its roots both in the financial and the economic. It first manifested itself in a dramatic way in the mortgage crisis in the United States. But given that all the financial institutions here in the US and throughout the world are linked because they're exchanging loans, currencies, facilities, assets, etc., they're all linked up. And once the first domino moved, it began to affect the loan and investment portfolio of all the major institutions. Where I think a mistake was made is that the first major institution, Lehman Brothers, was allowed to go down, partly due to the lack of an expeditious decision-making process by its own management, but also a failure on the part of U.S. authorities to recognize that once the first bank goes, it will have a multiplier effect throughout the system. That having been done, the lesson was quickly learned that you have to bail out these institutions, even though the situation they're in is of their own making. But because it has implications not only for them, but for the system and for the average man in the street, you have to bail them out, and you have to move quickly. Not only do you have to put liquidity into the system to allow the financial intermediation process to continue, but you also have to rebuild the capital base of these institutions. Not by buying risky assets, but by injecting capital. They have to take care of the risky assets by writing them down, writing them off, whatever. But you have to give liquidity to keep the wheels moving, and you have to rebuild the capital base, which is the key to rebuilding confidence, which is what is the delicate intangible at this time, in that things may not be as bad as they appear, but perception is important. That is why you see these wild gyrations in the stock market, because expectations, rational and irrational, exuberance, panic, all operating, and the market tends to have a herd instinct. Once there's a movement in one direction, it gets exaggerated. And we need to restore that confidence. An integral part of restoring confidence is that we have to coordinate the actions by all countries. It cannot be one country restoring bank capital here, one adding liquidity here, one adding fiscal stimulus there. We needed coordination, and that is what the G20 meeting was about.
I see.